or social half hour, however long we have. So, Mr. Branham, are you there?
I am here, and please,
Okay,
Brian.
Brian. Okay, all right. And people will be coming on as we're starting, but I'm going to go ahead because I know you have a lot to say, and I want you to have a chance to talk about everything you can within your time limit. I'm going to tell you first about the Bill No Flight School. Will offer a 4-year degree while training the next generation of commercial and airline pilots. The commercial pilot fixed wing BS degree program will provide hands-on flight training using the technical advanced Cirrus SR-20 airplane, state-of-the-art flight simulators, and classroom instruction from highly experienced aviation and industry professionals. Construction commenced on the new training facility and hangar at Yeager Airport in August of 2020, with plans to commence the inaugural class in August of 2021. In addition to obtaining their 4-year degree, all graduates will have earned commercial, multi-engine, certified flight instructor, instrument instructor, pilot certifications, and ratings. The Bill No Flight School graduates will help meet the nation's projected significant need for commercial pilots over the next 20 years. All flight training will be done at Yeager Airport with classroom instruction planned at the Bill No Flight School in Marshall's South Charleston campus. Marshall received his first Cirrus SR-20 on October 29th, 2020, with the additional aircraft to arrive in early 2021. I want to talk about Mr. Bryan Branham. He joined Marshall University team in August of 2020 as the director and chief flight instructor for the Bill No Flight School. He started his military flying career in the Army, where he flew both helicopters and fixed-wing aircraft. His experience includes flight training director, college professor, chief instructor, chief research pilot, chief test pilot, and airport management. He enjoyed several opportunities to fly airlines to and from Europe across the vast blue waters of the North Atlantic for the USA, Iceland, and Canada. Bryan welcomed the experience to fly the Black Hawk from the Navy ships in Prince William Sound, Alaska, and providing medvac flight support for the Exxon Valdez oil spill operations. He vividly remembers the beauty and flying experience in Alaska as some of the most challenging but rewarding flight operations of this career. Bryan received decorations for combat medvac dust-off operations during the 1990-1991 Gulf War and humanitarian flight support operations serving Bosnia, Kosovo, Turkey, and other European campaigns. And everyone needs to mute if you wouldn't mind. His military tours included the Philippines, Turkey, Germany, Honduras, several stateside locations, and numerous travels to other worldwide sites in support of military commitments. He earned his BS degree in aviation science from Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University and completed his executive MBA at Ohio University. He holds advanced pilot instructor certifications to include airport transport pilot. Bryan enjoys sharing about his flight ventures and the excitement of flying the DC-3 to the Oshkosh Air Show celebrating the 75th anniversary of the DC-3. Bryan is an outdoor enthusiast and still has the flying bug. And we're very thankful to have you here today, Bryan, to share with us this new development with the flight school. And I'm going to turn it over to you. And I'm just going to ask everyone, except the speaker, to mute because there's unintended background noise at times. So Bryan, go ahead, please.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity. And just to let everybody know, I'm a practical joker. I like to have fun, both when I'm flying and also when I'm talking to folks. And I did hear there's another pilot on the online here, so I guess I'll have to keep my war stories fairly truthful. And I say that in jest. So to give some more background for me, I grew up in South Carolina. I remember back in those days, that was when everybody was still preparing to go to Vietnam. We'd actually launched troops over there. This was back in the going through the mid 60s, I guess. And as a little kid, I would sneak through the woods to go up and watch the helicopters do their bivouac to prepare to go over to Vietnam. And so my uncle and I was probably 8 years old, he was probably 11 or so. We were peeking through this pine trees, hiding, and these guys, these Army guys, we called them, we didn't know what they were. They drove over in a Jeep, got out of the Jeep and walked over into the woods and said, "Hey, you boys want to ride?" So they took us for a ride through the field in the Jeep, and they drove us over to this cool looking helicopter that we had seen land about 10 minutes earlier. And one of the guys picked me up under my arms and sat me in the back of the helicopter with my feet dangling out of the helicopter. And I was in hog heaven. I was hooked then. So that's where I got the flying bug when I was 7 or 8 years old. Uh, I've had the opportunity to travel around the world uh, in the military. You know, there's good, the bad, and the ugly kind of stuff, but I don't think I would change a thing. Uh, Philippines, as Elizabeth had mentioned, you know, just traveling to those different neat locations, it has just been an experience. I never thought that I would be where I am. And it's because of some, you know, we all make sacrifices. I made some decisions earlier right after high school because I grew up in a very rural area, um, very low income, poor, we would call it by today. And so I decided that as an 18-year-old, I either was going to have to stay there and go find a job digging ditches or cutting somebody's grass, or not go to college because that wasn't an option for me, go in the military. So I thought, you know, and I talked to some folks, and I went down to the recruiter, signed up in the military, and didn't know how much fun I was going to have for the next 22 years. So I did that. And initially, I didn't fly in the military. I used to actually work on computers and cryptographic equipment. I worked in a building that had one door, no windows, and a security lock that had an 8-digit code. You had to punch in a code to get into the room. So we always laughed that we were going into the dungeon because the only light in there was the artificial light. And when the power went out, the generators would kick on, everything would get dark for a few seconds, and then it would pop back on. So fast forward, I decided, you know what? I went to an air show. I had the flying bug when I was in the Philippines. I started flying on my own. There was an air club. I flew all over the Philippines, but the place that I regret not flying was the rice terraces up in the mountains of the northeast of the Philippines. But I flew everywhere else I could fly, just having fun and just enjoying it. Fast forward, I go to an air show when I was in Arizona, and I saw this guy with these nice shiny boots, and he was standing by this cool looking helicopter. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, I remember seeing one of those in a field. So I talked with him, and then I went down to the recruiter and I told him, I said, I want to fly helicopters. So I went in the Army, started flying helicopters. Got to do some cool things there. Traveled around. I started flying the U-860 Black Hawk, which is kind of the primary. It replaced the Huey back in the days of the Vietnam. We had the Huey, and then we came out with the Black Hawk in the 70s. And so in the late 70s, the Black Hawk took over, and it's kind of the backbone, the workhorse now, where the Huey used to be the workhorse back in the 60s during the Vietnam and thereafter. And so I flew that, and I was in Korea as a test pilot, and a guy that I'd went to the test pilot course with, he was stationed in a different city in Korea, and we happened to hang out a bit before we had to go to Korea for the assignment without our families. And when we were at the test pilot course, his name was Jim. He came to me and he said, here's a form I want you to fill out. And I said, well, what's this form? We don't like filling out forms if we don't know what they are in the military. So he said, this is to apply for the fixed wing transition, we called it. And I said, I don't think I'm interested in flying airplanes. He goes, oh, it'll be fun. So we filled out the form. Fast forward, we're in Korea. He calls me up screaming and yelling. He didn't get selected for the course, I did. So he was all upset that he had hooked me up to fly airplanes. One of the things that I wanted to talk about real quick, I heard you folks talking about the accident back in, was it 70 or 71 at Marshall? And I thought I saw a name, Rick Walker. I apologize, I just saw something glance up there. The other gentleman that was on the, I got a thumbs up, I guess that's who it was. So the glide slope, I did a little bit of reading on that. I actually used it as a case study years ago in one of my crew resource management courses, where we talk to other pilots about trying to avoid keeping your stupid hat on for too long. So basically, my takeaway of what happened in the military. Let me give this background very quickly. I have had the opportunity or a misfortune of being involved in accident investigations. So I know what it looks like to see a crunched up airplane stuck on the side of a mountain or out in the field or something like that. And so that's always been a curiosity for me. And so we used to have a saying in the safety world in the military that you could always follow the trail of poor judgment and bad decisions to the accident site. And basically what that means is that it seems to be that once somebody starts making decisions, they can become compounded very quickly. So if we think about that night, yes.
I'm so sorry. We can't see your face. You're very dark. Do you have a light in your office, or is it the
Let me see if
backlighting?
this will help. Just a moment.
I'm sorry.
Does that help? For
See.
some reason, I can't. There we go.
Oh, yes. That's much better.
Is that
That's better. A
Let's
little.
see if I can turn something here, maybe.
You were light a minute ago, then you went dark again.
How about that?
That's
Is that better?
Yes.
That's
yes.
as much as I can get, unfortunately. It's because of the beautiful bright sunshine.
It's your backlighting. But one of our members emailed and said, so okay, I'm so sorry. Okay, go ahead.
Oh, I know what they want to do. They want to post my face in the post office. That's what they want to do.
All right. I'm sorry. Thank you.
No, that's fine. That's fine. So just reading over the accident for the football team, they were doing some things, unfortunately, and there's still some, I read the accident report from the NTSB. There's still a little bit of question about, was the altimeter setting correctly, some things like that. But there was one thing that I remember reading. There was an eyewitness over on one of the other mountain ridges, as I recall, that said that he was outside and heard an airplane that was flying very low. It was very loud. So there was a comment about that. So one of the suspicions is that they were flying, they either missed something on the instrument procedure, or what we call the instrument approach procedure, or they thought they saw a light, which could have been a light at a house, and mistaken it for the runway approach light. But at the end of the day, they actually flew too low too soon. So I'll give a graphic. If this is the airplane and the runway is over here, to get to the runway, there's an angle. And I don't recall if they were flying what we call a precision approach. This angle, the yellow pin here, that is a precision angle that is predetermined by instrumentation. Once I dial in a specific, like a radio station on a radio in my aircraft, it will give me that angle that and that angle goes up for several miles. And once I fly along, I intercept that angle and then I follow that angle down. And so that's what we call a precision approach, because it gives me about a 3-degree glide path, about 30 degrees, if we actually measured it with a protractor. And so there's another procedure. And like I said, I'm not positive which one they were flying. The other procedure is a runway airplane. We fly to a given point, a certain distance from the runway, and then we start a descent. And then we fly to another point and we call them step downs. They'll look like this. We'll fly down to that. Then we'll have another step down. We'll fly down, and then we're looking for the runway. And if we don't see the runway, we're supposed to do a missed approach and go fly somewhere else. So, but at the end of the day, there was just something missed. Unfortunately, there was some discussion in the cockpit on the cockpit voice recorder as well about there was a little bit of confusion, and also there were some takeaways from that we've incorporated into other flying venues about discussions in the cockpit. We don't want to be talking when we're here and we're getting ready to start going to the business end. We're always at the business end. As I joke, I've had students tell me, Bryan, when you get in the cockpit, you change. And I'm always a very jovial guy. But when I get in an airplane to go fly, especially if I'm in the business end, which is the flight end up there where the flight controls are, and I'm responsible to fly it, it becomes a business venture. And I tell people that there's a very important person on board, and that's me. And I want to get back. So there's a switch that I tell people that flips. And it's just a thought process that when you crawl in the aircraft, you can't take your joviality into the cockpit. You can't take your problems about the check that you bounced last week. There's a lot of things that you've got to flush out. So that mental switch has to flip. So I always kind of laugh about that when students tell me that. And not just students. I just flew with a good friend of mine the other day, and we were talking, and he goes, "I love flying with you." And I said, "Why?" He goes, "I can see that you're absolutely loving what you're doing." And he said, "But you're serious." And I said, "Well, yeah, I am." So when we think about the airplane again, we think about the runway over here. There was some discussion in the cockpit when the guys were getting ready to fly down this line to go land this airplane, that the Monday morning quarterback about the Sunday afternoon game would say that, well, those guys probably shouldn't have been talking about those things. Those are distractors, because they were talking about things that had absolutely nothing to do with the flying. And so those are some things that have come out of that particular accident when we talk about crew resource management. So some things have occurred from that. Going back to my career, and I apologize for jumping around for that, but I just caught that you folks were talking about that. And it is near and dear. I still talk to people. I watched the movie. I remember reading about the accident when I was in the military, and it was very disturbing, especially once I started flying. And I just talked to somebody a few months ago, right? It's like the week after I got on board with Marshall. So I came on board in mid-August. And shortly after I came on board, somebody said that someone had brought a bag, like a backpack from the accident site. Apparently they give those things back to the family members, and they brought it down and placed it as part of the memorial when they had the annual recognition of the accident. So it's interesting. It's a big world, but it's a small world. Going back to my military background, and it's so in Korea, I found out I was going to start flying airplanes. Came out of Korea. I was supposed to go to California because I had just come out of the Gulf War, 90 and 91, flying with 500,000 other U.S. military members. And so we all got assignments after being in the sand for 8 months or 9 months, that we got assignments. Some of us got good assignments, some of us didn't. And mine was going to Korea with the understanding I would go to California afterwards. That was my dream sheet, and that was my promise. So coming out of Korea, I contacted the assignment folks, and they said, "Well, we've got news and we got news." And you never want to hear that from the military assignment people. So they said, "Well, you're not going to California." And I was all excited about going to California. We had relatives out there. I was excited about the fact that I was going to be about 20 miles from the beach. Well, unfortunately, I go to this wonderful land called Germany. And in Germany, that was when I found out how much fun I was going to have flying both helicopters and airplanes. I got to fly to different places over there. I still counting up all the countries. I think last count was about 52 that I got to go to. Places from Budapest, Hungary. I've walked across the bridge. They called it the chain bridge. And this goes back to Hitler's days. The chain bridge had two large lions. I mean, huge. They were like the size of a truck, one on each side of the bridge, on both ends, as I recall. And Budapest, I didn't know at the time, it was two cities. There was Buda and Pest. And the king gave his wife one of the cities, and I forget which one was which. And there's a big monument across the Blue Danube when you're standing at the in front of the Parliament building and you look up the hill. There's a monument up there and a little plaque, and it tells you the history of Budapest and how the king gave his wife one of the cities on the other side. So what I remember walking across the chain bridge, and I'm looking at these lions and I'm thinking, man, I've got to get my family over here. They would love this. And so I get back to my room and I pick up this book that was in the hotel and I'm reading through it. Well, lo and behold, the reason those lions are still in existence was because Hitler had put out that no one was to destroy those lions. He liked them. He thought that was a beautiful city. He didn't want that bridge damaged. So that was kind of an awakening for me that there's a lot of history over there that ties into why some of these things still stand that were there before the days of the Nazi regime back in the World War II and pre-World War II. So fast forward, I'm getting to fly around the different places, Italy, and I started to learn what it meant about enjoying the food of Europe. So Italy has food ranging from pastas to seafood. It was just an experience of a lifetime. And of course, in Germany, you have to go to the fest every weekend. It doesn't matter, rain, snow, shine, torrential downpours, hurricanes, they're going to have a fest. They know how to have fun over there. And their favorite things, if you go to a fest, you can always get a beer that's at room temperature and you can get a bratwurst. You might not get a whole lot more, but you'll be able to enjoy yourself with those folks while you're dripping wet, for example. So just a lot of experiences there that were lifelong, no pun intended. Those are things that my friends tell me when I tell them stories sometimes as we're sitting down having dinner, and we'll be talking. And I like to use the term, and I don't know why I don't do it intentionally. I apparently use the term vividly a lot because I tell them, I said, one of the things that I jokingly say that would be cool if we could plug in a TV monitor and see what's inside our brain as we talk to people about it. Because in my mind, it is vividly clear. And I'm actually writing some memoirs right now. And my friend, she told me, she said, Bryan, I know the perfect name for your book. And I said, well, what's that? She goes, Vividly. so it's fun to share with folks about this. I've been here in Ohio. I still live up in Ohio. We're getting ready to move down to the Charleston area. We've been here about 22 years, I guess. Came here out of the military. Got to do some other wonderful flying when I was a chief research pilot. Flew every place from all the way down into the Gulf of Mexico, flying into Mexican airspace, out to California from Ohio in one of our airplanes, a corporate size aircraft, twin engine turboprop it's called, all up and down the East Coast, up into Canada, down to the Keys in Florida. So I've got to really do some neat things. Flew to Alaska a couple of times as well in our King Air doing some research work. And the real irony behind the opportunity for me right now is I met Governor Manchin probably, 20 years ago, excuse me, then Governor Manchin, down in West Virginia, I think at Charleston Airport, I forget exactly where it was. He was coming out of a building at the airport. I was walking in to request refueling. And I looked at him and I said, I recognize you. So I stuck my hand out, and my wife always asks me when I talk to people, she says, do you ever meet a stranger? And I said, not that I can remember. So we talked a little bit and I said, well, you folks need a flight training program down here. And so fast forward about 3 years ago, a friend of mine said, hey, they're thinking about talking about starting a flight training program. And I told him, I said, it would be awesome to be involved in that and to start a flight training program from the beginning. And here I am. So I'm living the dream, as they say. This is something that I enjoy doing. I enjoy the challenge. I absolutely love flying. I mean, if you could plug in the fun meter, when I see an airplane and I know I'm going to go crawl in it, it will just go over into the red and you'll have to keep me in check. Uh, and I just look forward to sharing that with the young folks as they come into our program. Now I've told you all except my shoe size.
So do you have any questions for Bryan? Do we have any questions? We've got a few more minutes, don't we?
Oh yeah, yeah. I can hang out for about another 15 minutes, I think.
Okay.
I guess I can speak. I raised my hand, but sometimes.
Oh, you can. Oh yeah. Just
No,
unmute
no,
yourselves
that's
and hop in.
Oh,
Sure.
I'm sorry. I don't see all the faces. Oh, I
No.
just figured out how to use this
Gallery
Zoom
view.
thing.
I have a question.
Yes.
What do you actually look for in candidates for this program? What are some of the requirements, and certainly the most important requirements? What are you looking for from these young people?
You know, I call that in the category an extremely good question. And the reason I say that, the requirements to get into the program are the admission requirements for Marshall for the most part. Now, the Federal Aviation Administration, they have some vision requirements, some health requirements. You have to pass a medical. And to fly with the airlines, you also have to have what we call a Class 1, which means you have to have an EKG and you have to get that done once a year. But otherwise, I've seen the gamut of students come through and be successful. I've seen students come through programs that were there because mom or dad were an airline pilot. Successful, but they didn't have the flying. They had the flying bug, and they really excelled in the program. There we go.
How many students?
I'm going to turn my video off because we're buffering very bad.
Good. Now you're okay.
There we go.
How easy or difficult will it be for the graduates to find employment, and where will they find it?
So another great question. Before the COVID kicked off, the employability rate for graduates from a 4-year program like the one that we'll have was almost 100% with the airlines. So once you go through our program and meet the requirements, and then you get 1,000 flight hours, you can apply for an airline transport pilot rating. Once you obtain that, then the airlines are going to hire you. I've been following this very closely ever since the virus hit, and everything that I read says that within the next 3 years or so, we're going to be back to the normal operations with the airlines. For an example, I just saw in the news this morning that after President-elect Biden takes office, he's going to lift the travel ban. Well, there's an impact on the airline industry as well. So regardless of what happens there, once the virus stabilizes, we're going to be back to normal. So the positive part of that is that our first graduating class is 5 years away, 4.5 years away as well. So by that time, the industry is going to be stable. The tie-in with that is that it's a mandate that when pilots that work with the airlines, when they turn 65, they have to retire, period. No questions, you're gone. And there's a lot of retirements coming up. And the other good part about our program, I talked to what I'll call my peers at other different institutions. They're over capacity. They have students waiting in line to get a flight slot for training. So this is all a good thing. There's the employability rate is going to go back to close to 100%.
Very good.
Will we have a difference between recruiting in-state and out-of-state students? Because I'd imagine you'd have quite a few from out of state, and will that affect tuition for them?
Yeah, of course, the tuition for the flight fee part of it. So you'll have the tuition for the school, but the flight fee tuition is going to be the same whether you're in state or out of state. So you'll have two different types of, you'll have the tuition and then you have the flight course cost. My suspicion, we don't specifically recruit for out of state versus in state. I'm going to say the contacts that I've had have probably been 75% in-state, 25% out of state. It wouldn't surprise me if that didn't get to 50-50. Because I think what's going to start happening, for example, I've talked to 3 or 4 other institutions. I call it redshirting students, like football teams redshirt the players for the first year. They don't have the capacity. They don't have enough airplanes and enough flight instructors to support all the students that are applying for the programs. So those students are either waiting for a slot or they're going somewhere else so they can start flying now. So I'm looking at doing some things there to provide them an opportunity to be able to do something while they're not flying, that they'll be gainfully employed, so to speak, on being able to work on some degree things. But eventually, it wouldn't surprise me to have a 50-50 mix.
Sounds good.
Rick, you had a question. Are you still there?
I am. I wanted to say, first of all, thank you for spending time with us. When I became a pilot, they weren't using simulators much at all back in '72, but I know that now simulators are going to be used a great deal. My question is sort of an offshoot of that, because if these people do decide to go into military flying, would their simulator work help them to be like flying a drone, or is it so different that it just doesn't, there's no correlation between what you do in a simulator now? I imagine a lot of their time is going to be spent in a simulator for financial as well as stopping and learning. It's a good environment, but I just wondered how much you're going to use simulators in their teaching.
So Rick, first of all, I want your address so I can come visit you on the beach.
Yeah, that's in the guest room that my wife doesn't want to be seen.
But as far as the simulators, so a couple of things, Rick. The FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, they drive the percentages of simulation that we can have in a given course. For example, some of the courses, it may be 10% of the overall hours. Some of it may be 20% of the overall hours. As far as what they could do in the military, if you get a chance, I urge everyone to go visit the aviation, the Build No Flight School page at Marshall. And there's some pictures in there that shows the outside of our aircraft and the inside. And I'll make myself a note. I'll send Elizabeth a couple of notes there about some places to look at, and you can see the instrumentation. So our simulators are going to have the ability to emulate what they will be able to do in the aircraft. So that's the correlation of what the students will do in the simulator. Going into the military, one of the things that we're finding out is that young folks that have never flown before, they tend to do much better than us older folks that have been flying for a while when it comes to using this new technology. So the learning curve seems to be a little bit different because they don't necessarily have to unlearn anything. Going into the military and flying the drones, this will be, because I look at the drone is not unlike almost a gaming environment. You have a video camera that's recording wherever the drone is operating, and then you have somebody flying that machine, but they never see the machine. They're just seeing the outside visuals. I think it's going to be very transparent. I think people could go from a flight environment or a training environment like this and transition into the military quite readily. The other neat thing about our technology, the aircraft that we're using, the Cirrus SR-20 and our simulation devices, you think you're in an airline or a large corporate jet or corporate aircraft. The technology, the avionics and the displays in there, when the students leave our program and these aircraft and they crawl in an airline or a corporate jet, they're not going to feel unfamiliar at all. They're going to have, they'll see the flight management system not unlike what we have in our airplane. Our airplanes will have, they have autopilots in them as well. And these are all positive things that will transfer directly into the industry for their careers. Did that capture it for you, Rick? Did the?
Yeah, and thank you much.
You bet. You bet.
Linda, did you have a question?
Yes, I was wondering why Jaeger was chosen over Tri-State. Is it bigger runways or what? Just more availability? What was the reason?
That was before I came on board, so I'll have to defer that to President Gilbert and the board members on that one. I don't know the exact reason for that.
Okay, thank you.
You bet.
I think we have about 5 more minutes. Do we have any other questions or comments for Mr. Branham?
Bryan, please.
Bryan, I'm sorry.
I was wondering how many students you anticipate admitting in the first group.
In the first group, going back to when I interviewed, I speculated with the 2 airplanes that we plan on having, we'll probably have about 25 students, maybe 30. It wouldn't surprise me that we end up at the end of the day, it wouldn't surprise me if we have 40 or 50 students, maybe even more than that apply, but we'll be able to handle probably, we'll be able to support directly 20 with 2 airplanes, maybe 25. And then I'm working on some things, some avenues that if I can get those through the process, we'll be able to handle between 40 and 50 if they're willing to wait a subsequent semester. In other words, they may not have a flight slot for the first semester or maybe even the second, but they'll be able to take classes towards the degree. So my goal is to, like I said, the 20 to 25, but I don't goal. It breaks my heart.
How many faculty will you have?
Down and talk with a young person and tell them that, you know what, you might want to look at a different career. This is not working out for you.
How many faculty will you have on your staff?
Right now, by definition, I guess I'm an associate professor. So I guess I just thought about that. I'm wearing 3 hats. I'm wearing a director hat, kind of like a chair, a chief instructor hat, and an associate professor. So it'll be myself, and I envision, depends on how we can set it up, because I'm looking at cross functionalities as well. I'd say between 2 and 3 faculty. And again, that's going to be based on the numbers of students that we ultimately end up with.
And will all the faculty have flight credentials?
Yes, that I'm pushing for that. One of the things that I've learned over my years is that it's difficult for students to absorb information when you're trying to get information aviation-wise from somebody that doesn't have a background in aviation. So because all of our courses, even the non-flight courses, there's a lot of technical aspects to those that directly tie into what they'll do in the aircraft.
Thank you.
You bet.
Will the non-flight courses be taught at the South Charleston campus, Marshall campus, or whereabouts?
Yeah, I think initially, while we're finishing up the construction, some of it will be done both as a combination, even after the facility is constructed, between South Charleston and up at the airport at the facility. Once the facility is completed, there's 2 rooms that are dedicated to classroom size, and you can open them up to expand them like accordion door kind of things. The idea is that we don't want to transport students any further than we absolutely have to. So that's why we're looking at utilizing the South Charleston campus as we need to. And of course, the other thing that, especially with COVID, I suspect that in the educational environment, and I've just been talking to other colleagues about this as well, I think we'll start seeing more online and virtual type classes, even after we get out of the COVID environment. So I plan on capitalizing on that as well to an extent, but I am going to temper that because learning face to face versus learning at looking at a screen is two totally different things. So I'm weighing some things out on that aspect as well.
Thank you.
You bet.
Any other questions or comments?
Elizabeth, do you have his email address, or is he in the Marshall directory?
I do. I can share that with you. Yeah, he should be in the directory. He is in the directory, I believe, but if they've updated it.
If it's okay with him.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And like I said, if you go to the Marshall website, the homepage, and then the search box, just type aviation, and a link will, or a hyperlink will show up for the Build No Flight School, and my information's under the contact us.
Yes, I just checked his, the only thing that's in there is his name and email. He doesn't say where your office is or your office number, but you're in there.
Well, ironically, I don't have an office permanently yet because the building's not finished. So I'm the folks at the Capitol Jet Center at Yeager, they were nice enough to let me use an office there. But in today's technology, the offices don't have phones permanently in like we used to see in the old days.
No. Although I have a landline.
No, you can still get landlines, or is that
I have one. Matter of fact, I don't know why, and maybe Eric can explain this to me, but when I'm on Zoom, and I have a sound bar, I have a new computer in my office, and I have a big sound bar, but when I'm on Zoom, it runs through, the sound runs through my phone.
Oh, so your phone is an internet phone.
It is an internet. I'm sorry. So I guess I don't really have a landline per se.
Yeah. I was gonna say, where I live, they don't have enough wire to get a landline out to me.
Yeah, no, it is hooked. It is dependent and hooked to the internet. I forgot that. See, thank you for that. Yeah. So I guess that's why it runs the sound. But anything else on my computer, the sound runs through my sound bar. So I don't know. Go figure.
Yeah, the technology is amazing.
Yeah, and I'm behind the times.
Speaking of that, our aircraft, it has Bluetooth capability to communicate with an iPad, for example. It's just amazing. The other thing that I forgot to mention, the real irony behind this, the technology that is in this aircraft we're buying, I did the research flights on this 21 years ago. And so it's really awesome to look at the things that we were doing research on in a avionics research center. And 20 years later, I'm actually flying aircraft that have incorporated that technology. So I get to live in the future.
Cool.
I have a question.
Yes.
In the fifth, do you still have a height limit for aviate pilots?
The military, I think, has a height limit depending on what you're going to do. For example, my brother-in-law, his torso height was too tall, so he applied to flight school, but he couldn't pass the sitting height to be a fighter pilot. He was too tall on the torso. I always told him he was like a Dotson puppy. You know, he had short legs and a real tall, and he was like 6'6", but it was just his torso. But for us, there's not a requirement for that. Now, with that said, you have to be able to get in and out of the aircraft, of course. And I have seen that where we had a student one time that was 8 inches tall, and he couldn't get in the airplane. So we had to use a certain aircraft for him that cost more money to operate, but he stuck with it. But it was tough for him. He had to get in it and slouch down, and it was interesting to see him get in the aircraft.
Well, the reason I ask, in the 50s, early 50s or mid 50s, I guess, I was in the CAP. So, and I got the flight bug then, although I couldn't do it. I was only 4'11", I did go, it was very interesting. It was quite an experience. We'd fly out of the Chesapeake airport over here in Ohio. And at those times, and we'd go different places, you were a patrol.
Right.
And yeah, and I remember flying in a transport. And they took to Langley Air Force Base in Virginia for a couple of weeks during the year. So it was quite an experience, and a lot of times I wish I had been able to have stayed in it.
Yeah, I saw somebody's name pop up. I don't know if they were trying to speak or not.
I saw Dr. Timmons' name pop up.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I just joined.
Oh, okay. Did you have any? Well, stay with us because we've got some time to go yet.
Thank you.
That's perfectly fine. Do we have any other comments or questions? Do we have more time, Brian? Are you?
Yeah, we can go till 11:30. That's not a problem.
Okay. Any other comments, questions?
So on the physical size, the limitations for that, again, the physical parts of it would be there. But for example, I flew with a guy that was a former Marine when I flew helicopters in the Army, Blackhawks. And of course, in the Blackhawk, you could put the seat up and down and you could move it back and forth. But even with that, he had to put a cushion behind his back. I used to pick on him. I'd always ask him, Perry, how are you over 5 feet tall? He was a little guy, but he looked like Arnold Schwarzenegger in a smaller package. But he always had a cushion behind his back, and he couldn't put a cushion under him. He tried that because when he did that, he couldn't reach the rudder pedals on the helicopter. So, but he got by. I made him it was a prank I pulled on him. He didn't like it too much. I took some 4x4s and made little wooden blocks with pieces of rope around it. And I told him he could strap those to his feet so it would extend his feet out. He didn't see too much humor in that.
Right.
Any other questions?
Questions, comments? Anything you'd like to add?
It's been a really interesting and informative program. I knew that we were starting something with a flight school in Charleston, but really didn't understand what was going to happen and the kind of background that our flight director is going to have. I'm not sure, Brian, what your exact title will be. It sounds like you'll have a lot of titles.
Yeah.
I think it's a really great thing to happen for the area and for Marshall. So I was delighted to have had the opportunity to hear you this morning.
Well, thank you. Let me give you a real quick overview of what's going to happen. So the construction of the facility has already started. And for those that are familiar with Yeager, so as we go, and for those that are not familiar with it, as we drive up the hill and we go to the terminal building at Yeager Airport, you walk into the terminal, and as you go out to the ramp to the aircraft, directly behind that is the main runway, the only one that's open. They used to have intersecting runways that were like this, all right? So there's 2, 3, and 0, and 0, 5, and I forget the other one that's closed. I think it's 3, 2, and 0, 4, 1, 4. Yeah, I forget what that one is. But anyway, on the closed runway, so if this is the yellow is the actual runway where the airlines will operate off of, and of course we will. This closed runway, at this end down here, the terminal building is up here, right at the intersection, if you will, between the yellow runway and the blue pin closed runway. At the very end of the closed runway, to the south end of that runway, is where our facility will be. And the facility, when you drive up the hill, don't go all the way to the very top. You'll turn on Eagle Mountain Road, I think it is. It's the one that takes you over to what they call the fixed base operation and where the FAA building is. When you turn there, you'll go up to the end of that road and you'll be at the back door of our facility. And inside the facility, we'll have a simulator room. We'll have a very advanced simulator in there. Actually, we'll have 2 simulators. You'll walk in the back door. There's a center foyer that you'll look down. And as you continue down the center foyer, you'll walk up to the dispatch area. There'll be a lounge area for people that can sit and wait. The students can wait there and do their studies for the next class. As you continue forward, and remember the closed runway, the active runway is the yellow one, the closed runway. When you walk out of the dispatch building, you're going to be looking straight up the old runway. And as you walk out of the main building, if you look to your right, we'll have a hangar there that will hold 9 airplanes. I think they said 8 or 9. So that's going to be the new facility. It's really, really neat. It's really going to be a beautiful location there. So the construction started. We've got 1 airplane. Ironically, I go to my training for the airplane this coming Monday. So I'll be out in Knoxville, Tennessee for a week getting training on that. I have flown the airplane already one time for a couple of hours. It's an experience. It's, like I said, I'm living in the future. It's really, really exciting for me.
I wanted to ask, is Bill Noe the same person that swam for the Y when he was a kid and won championships? And okay, that's what I thought. Didn't think there were too, back then he was Billy Noe. I didn't think there were too many.
Yeah.
By that name. Yeah,
actually there's a newsletter on our website. It kind of gives Bill's background there, and it talks about his swimming days. And
yeah, he was great back when he was 12 or 14.
Yeah. When I was reading about it, my son was a swimmer in high school and a wrestler, which was kind of unusual. But I was reading about Bill's background. I'm like, wow, I can relate to that. So it was interesting to see his background go from swimming to flying to being the president of NetJets, and now here as our executive assistant for the airport. So this is exciting for me.
Absolutely.
Anyone else?
I have a question concerning the cost of this aircraft.
You want to know how much it cost?
Yes.
A lot.
Well, I'm sure of that, but of course I have absolutely no idea. And
I think the website shows it at over $400,000, I believe, which is not unusual. It's shocking to me. When I first got out of the military and the university I worked at where I was the director of a program, we had airplanes that were, let me think, they were probably 3 years old. And when they purchased those airplanes, I think they were 2003 and 2004 models. When they were purchased, they were $165,000. So fast forward 17 years, you cannot buy a new single engine airplane for less than $400,000. Then if you put avionics in them, the technology in the aircraft is what really drives it. That stuff gets very pricey very quickly because it has to be certified, not unlike the airplane. And that can quickly drive the cost of a single engine airplane up to $500,000. So it's a shocking number for me, but there's no way around it, unfortunately.
so this the cost of this is the responsibility of Marshall. Is that correct?
Yeah, there was some funding from grants and whatnot, is my understanding. Again, all of this was laid out before I came on board, and I have not, I'll be honest with you, I have not looked at the details of, how all those things transpired. But that was all done probably a year before I came on board.
Thank you.
You bet.
I can't think in terms of that much money. But then what would be the time frame that would continue to be a usable aircraft?
An airframe, it's not unusual for schools to operate these, depends on how much they fly every year. It's not unusual for them to fly an airframe for 10 or 15 years. So but again, it just depends on, what the salvage, when you think about it from the standpoint of depreciation, I doubt the university, I don't know, that's out of my wheelhouse, as I say. It just depends on how they want to turn over the capital assets.
Thank you.
You bet.
Do you have anything else just to add or to say? Do you have anything else, Jenny?
Oh, no.
Okay, I thought you were raising your hand. Well, I want to thank Bryan for coming today. I learned a lot, and I work here at Marshall. I think it's going to be a great program to offer people who want to fly. I'm not a real fun flyer. I'm a white knuckle flyer. I will admit that, but I do, and I know flying is a wonderful thing that we have. I don't like takeoffs and landing. Otherwise, I'm okay.
One of those is optional.
Yeah, they're both optional. Can't be.
No, the takeoff is optional, but if you execute the takeoff,
you gotta land. Yep, you gotta land. So no, I think it's great that we've got this. So is the aircraft actually? I've seen pictures. Is it actually at Yeager?
It went back to Knoxville. They went back to do some touch up on a couple of things, and then I'll bring it back after I do my training at the end of next week.
Okay. Well, I think it's fascinating that we have this program, and I think it will. Bert, what are your thoughts? You are a Marshall alum from working here at Marshall and the registrar's office. Do you have any thoughts on return on investment for this new program?
I think it's wonderful and much needed, certainly.
Yeah, I do too.
I have a good friend that did flight training, and he had to move to Florida to do it. And I just think it's wonderful that we would have this opportunity at Marshall.
Yeah, the other good thing about this, not only does it add a differentiator to Marshall, it's yet another degree program from a professional degree standpoint. Employability is very high, but also I was telling somebody the other day, it's not just the employing a flight instructor, generating a future career for a young student in there, but when the folks come to put fuel in the aircraft, somebody's got to drive the truck to put the fuel in the aircraft. Somebody's got to put the fuel in the truck, in the fuel truck. Somebody's got to change the tires on the airplane. Someone has to inspect the aircraft. So it's going to be a good boost in the arm, if you will, for other jobs in the local area as well. So there's some other things going on behind the scenes that will definitely be a benefit.
Definitely, it's like a trickle down effect,
Oh, absolutely. Yep.
Well, I'm excited about it. I've watched the press releases and the news via Marshall, and the plane itself is really quite attractive with the Marshall theme on it. We like green and white.
The inside of it.
Pardon me?
You should be on the inside. So when they brought it over, I flew around with the folks just in the local area for about 30 minutes. It's one thing to see the artist drawings of it that were initially on the website. It's another thing to actually be inside the aircraft, smell the leather seats, and of course, for me, with the flying bug, to actually feel it rolling down the runway and take off and fly. It's just exhilarating.
So how many can fly at one time? What's the limit of passengers?
There's 2 seats up front, and it actually has 3 seat belts in the back. But it's probably, you would have to have 3 small people in the back, like 3 teenagers, if you will, adolescents. I plan on having a flight instructor, a student up front, and then another student, if not 2 students in the back. We'll have to see how that goes.
Yeah.
One of the things that I've learned over my decades of being in the world of flying is that sometimes we can learn better because our mind is not distracted of trying to keep the greasy side down flying the machine. You can learn a lot by observing other people's mistakes and other people's learning as well. So I'm going to capitalize on that. I've had good experience with that. That was one of the, and that's, as I tell people, that's something that I brought from the military. I've seen it work, and that's we're planning on doing that as well.
And I would assume at any time you can take control of the aircraft if a student.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's the first thing that I brief, and that's what every pilot will brief before they take off. Even if they're by themselves, there's going to be a personal flight, pre-departure briefing.
Yeah.
Briefing there that if you're flying with somebody else, whoever's in charge of the aircraft, ultimately responsible, there's a briefing that's short and says that if any time I say I have the controls, you take your hands and your feet off the controls, and I'll fly the airplane, and we'll do a positive transfer of the controls.
I just remember the Miracle on the Hudson, and the captain, I can't think of his name, Sullenberger. He actually wasn't his plane at that point in time. It was his co-pilot, and he said, "My plane," or something to that effect, like, "It's mine now." Yeah. And he took over. So I figure that you're going to be able to go my plane if necessary.
Yeah, and all that's briefed in before you even take off. So there's a clear understanding of who's going to do what. Because as I told somebody the other day, in fact, a friend of mine, we were having dinner a couple of weeks ago. We were talking about flying. I said, well, the one thing when I told him about what my students or some people had flown with me, it says that, Bryan, you change when you get in the cockpit. So I say, well, do you think that's for a reason? And of course it is. And I said, you know, when we get in the cockpit of an aircraft, that's when our democracy ends.
Yeah, true that.
Along that line, are there going to be any psychological tests for the students?
Oh, there's a psychological test every time you're going to walk in the building and Bryan gets to see you. They have no idea what's coming for them.
But is there any real testing to make sure people have what it takes? Seriously.
Yeah, so psychological tests, no. But there's some things that they're incorporated into the training programs that assess those kinds of things. There's a huge focus on decision making, good judgment. We call it aeronautical decision making. I call it decision making in general. One of the things that I'll talk to our young folks about is that it's not a matter of if a young person that's 18 years old, whatever the age is, when they come to, they're not at home with mom and dad anymore, or Aunt Sue or Uncle Bob. They're there on their own. And so I tell them, all right, before you leave your room, I want you to look at your roommate and ask them to see if you have your stupid hat on. And if you do, take it off. And if there's nobody there, you look in the mirror and say, okay, do I have my stupid hat on? So that's the jovial part of it. But those kinds of things are always assessed, and that will be an ongoing process for every flight course and every flight they go into. There's an element of psychology and decision making on that.
Okay. Thank you.
I tell folks that when we're in an academic setting, we're mandated to assess student performance by giving a test, and it could be an oral test, a practical test, hands-on, or a written, whatever. You know, we can get through the test of academic. They can take these skill sets out and apply them into the test of life.
So do we have anything else? This is, have we taken you past your time? Are you okay with your time?
Yeah. I'm waiting on it. I'm watching the bottom of my screen. I expect to see something pop up any minute, but we can talk until I see that.
Okay. All right. Because when Diane asked the question, Diane's background is psychology. So.
Okay. Well, how did I do? Was that a good response?
That was fine. But obviously it's one of those occupations that you do want somebody to be stable and emotionally balanced and able to make good decisions.
Well, it's interesting. We have some different acronyms. In the military, ironically, the acronym was DEATH, the word death. And it talks about the things that become stressors and distract you. Well, outside of the military, somebody decided that with the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, they probably decided, death is probably not the good word to use. So we have what we call the I'm safe checklist. And then we have a decide model. And these are all psychological things, actually a combination of psychology and decision-making. Include like, are you taking medication? Do you have a headache? Did you stay out too late last night? All of those things. And these are assessed literally every time the student gets ready to go fly. And it's not just the students. I do the same thing myself, and I've been flying since 1980. And before I go get in an aircraft, that mental switch flips. Bryan becomes it's not, I jokingly tell people, we all have a little Jekyll Hyde in us, but when I go start getting around an airplane, that switch flips inside, and my psychology changes a bit. The things that I think about and focus on do change.
So is there, excuse me, along these lines, so do students have to have a background check to make sure that there's nothing back there that, could be an issue?
There's a process. They have to fill out some TSA paperwork. International students have to go through a lot, and our program won't be set up to enroll international students for quite some while, because there's probably a 2-year process to do that, I'm guessing. And then there's an ongoing requirement for that. But yes, there's an element of a background check, if you will, through the TSA. Not the same folks when we go to the airport to go fly.
That's reassuring.
Oh, yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
The plane obviously is very high tech, and all the instruments are high tech. Do you train the students so they, let's say in case a circuit breaker goes off and the instruments are gone, that they can fly without all this high tech? Is that part of the training?
Well, Jack, is it Jack? Am I reading the
Yes,
name?
yes.
Yeah. So Jack, that's a question that some folks have asked me, and the answer is yes. So I grew up in the days of no high tech. The radios were tuned not unlike the old black and white TV when we were little kids growing up. So that was a technology that I was accustomed to when I first started flying. Fast forward, now we have the technology, and I've had the nice laptop screens, if you will, in an aircraft go black on me before. Because I tell people, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, and is it going to be you flying the airplane when it happens? And so the long of the answer to your question is that yes, we'll have things incorporated into the flight training that will simulate a failure of that display, and the students will be required to use standby instrumentation in the aircraft. And it does have standby instrumentation in the aircraft. They won't be happy with it, but they'll have to learn to use it.
Thank you.
So do all aircrafts have that standby instrumentation?
Yeah, it's a certification requirement. If an aircraft is what we call certified a certain way, then they have to have the standby instrumentation. And this, in other words, if the airplane is certified to fly in the clouds, there has to be a standby instrument in it.
Is that the first way they're taught to fly? Through the instrumentation versus the electronics?
Oh, no. A lot of times I'll go up with a student, even an advanced student. I'll usually take a writing pad with me or something, and I don't take it to take notes. I take it so I can cover up instrumentation inside the aircraft. So when you first start flying, I don't want you looking at the instruments. I want you to be able to look outside, enjoy. I'm trying to instill the flying bug into these young folks. I want you to be able to look outside and to get a feel for what the picture looks like, so that when you see that, okay, I'm at 1,000 feet and I'm maintaining it, I don't want your nose up like this, I don't want it down like that. So, it's hard to do that when you first start flying and using the instruments. And also it's a negative habit transfer. If I teach you to fly the instruments from the very beginning, you'll become reliant on those and you won't be able to look outside and look for traffic.
So you want them to have that feel of flying an airplane, the looking, the seeing, the keeping it so. But isn't that what happened to John Kennedy Jr., that he he lost his daylight and his horizon became skewed for him, and he didn't have the instrument training background to look at the instruments to fly.
So this goes back to the psychology with, if I'm looking at the name right, Diane.
Yes.
So one of the other things that we instill in our young folks, and I talked to my friend about this now, and he's my age, he has his own airplane, but he doesn't have the experience that I have. I tell him, one of the things that we have to do, and it's difficult for us, especially for type A personalities, and yes, I am a type A, probably a type A plus, I would imagine. We have to be able to identify our limitations, and we have to understand and accept that if we don't have the training to do certain things, like to fly at night across the ocean, those are things that I can say from experience, that even from an experience standpoint of a former military pilot, the first time I did that in the military, I was like, man, I don't know which way is up or down. Are those city lights over there, or are those stars? And then I'm like, wait a minute, I don't feel myself hanging by my seat belts, my shoulder straps in the aircraft, so I know the bottom is down. So that's what got him in trouble. Unfortunately, he hadn't been doing that for a while, and he was not instrument rated at the time, as I recall.
Right. So before you fly solo, should you be able to fly both ways? That's, I guess, what I'm asking.
Well, no, you have to make a decision. And the other thing that goes into every time an aircraft is launched, we make decisions based on weather. So if it's nighttime outside, we would go, okay, when's the last time I flew at night? What's the environment I'm going to be flying in? Is it over land? Am I flying in the mountainous areas? And so those are the things that we go through mentally. And then we have to compare those with our training and also what we call our recency of experience. When's the last time I flew in this kind of environment?
Yeah. And he had all those against him: night, over water, and probably inexperience as far as flying solo.
Yeah, remember what I said earlier, we can typically follow the chain of events, which include poor judgment, poor decision-making, to the accidents. And there's all kinds of things that go into play with that. I know in the military, for example, we'd be gone away from home for 6 weeks sometimes, and we get what we call get home-itis. And so we had to really think, all right, let's make sure we're on our P's and Q's here, so we don't make shortcuts and things like that. So and these are the things that I focus a lot on to instill in our young folks. Yes.
Jenny?
Yes. Early on, you alluded to more strict regulations for admission to any of these programs from international students. So could you comment on the situation that occurred in Florida several years ago on the 2 students who fell into that category, but were later characterized as terrorists?
I'm not familiar. A few years ago, I'm not familiar with that particular situation. And that's one of the things, 911, unfortunately, as I always tell people, in the world of aviation, not unlike other industries, but specifically aviation, we typically don't see many changes unless somebody gets hurt. And if it's just 1 or 2 people, if that person that gets hurt or those people that get hurt don't get a lot of public exposure, then the chances of something getting changed significantly may not occur. But if we take 911 with the terrorist, that's why we have the TSA, that's why we have all these other security procedures. So what happens in the background now when we look at international students? There's an initial approval process, and I think, and I haven't done this for a long time, I think there's a semi-annual requirement for them to renew paperwork as well. And all of those things are in place. So I'm not sure what happened down there, but at the end of the day, I mean, there's some smart people out there that have bad intentions. And so I can only assume that there's people out there that can hide things to an extent.
Thank you.
there anything else we'd like to talk about or add or?
I've got a question.
Yeah, Jay, go ahead.
I have a question, Elizabeth.
Sure.
This is kind of on a different realm about the new program. I was under the impression that we were also going to have a school of airplane mechanics that was going to be associated with this. Is that true or not?
Yeah, those are the maintenance part and the flight part. Those are two distinctly separate programs, and you cannot intermix those. So yes, they're working on a maintenance program as well, and that's going to be based out of Huntington Tri-State, is my understanding. There's a large facility already over there, and I think
okay.
to what's to repurpose that so they could use that facility.
Jack, you had a question?
Yes. Does this new aircraft have one of those parachutes that
It
can
does.
safely? It seems like it would be a hard landing even with a parachute. But
I was reading the other night that it's the landing is about 1,700 feet per minute, and I haven't done the math. I think it's the equivalent of about 12 miles an hour, which is a little jolt.
So the aircraft itself has a parachute?
Yes.
Can you tell us about that? Because we have about 10 more minutes. I don't know what that means.
So the way the parachute works is that, so if I'm flying the airplane, I'm sitting in the airplane, my hands are facing the front, and I'm sitting in the left seat. If I reach my right hand up, there's a handle like a T handle. It's about that big actually. And it kind of folds out of the ceiling at about a 45-degree handle, or an angle rather, and you jerk on that and a parachute deploys. It has it's kind of, for lack of better description, it has some kind of propulsion. I don't know if it's a small rocket motor or an explosive device or whatever. Back behind the rear window is where that parachute is located. And then it has straps that actually are built into the body so that when the airplane, if the parachute gets deployed, if this is the aircraft, the parachute comes out up top and the airplane kind of descends straight down like this. Slight nose down attitude.
I did not know that.
Yeah, and there's actually been quite a few stories of people having to use those. And like if they're over a city or something like that, there's no runways, so you have to take your chances. I just saw a picture the other day. There was one where the airplane landed in somebody's front yard. The person had deployed the parachute.
Wow.
Yeah.
Diane, did you have something to add, or Judy?
No.
Okay. I'm trying to scan everyone to make sure we've got our questions and comments in. Well, Bryan, thank you so much for coming on and talking with us today. I learned a lot, actually.
I appreciate the opportunity. I've enjoyed talking with everyone.
Well, thank you. We're doing the best we can with this COVID and meeting via the internet, but it's working for us. It's working. So again, thank you. And we've got about 8 minutes if the group wants to stay on. We can have our